So welcome back to Culture Central's Radical Listening Week 2025. My name is Lucy Lopez. I'm a curator and a researcher, and I'll be hosting today's conversation. I'm a white woman with red hair. I'm wearing brown glasses and a black dress, and I am probably visibly pregnant depending on the camera angle. So this week has been about listening and collaboration, hearing about what needs to change, and shaping a charter for equity that's rooted in real experiences from across the West Midlands. And throughout the week, we've been talking about opening up access, about finance and economics, about equity and intersectionality, and leadership and governance. And these are all key areas that have come from the Charter for Equity research that I've been doing for Culture Central. So today, we're talking about recruitment practices, who gets in, how they get in, and how bias, conscious or not, shows up in that process. And thinking about what we can do as a sector to make accessing opportunities a bit more equitable. And to help me today, I'm joined by Nikki Riggon, who is a creative producer and head of programs at Punch Records, by Tina Hofman, who's a theatre practitioner, co-founder and co-director of Not Now Collective, and Hazel Sealeaf, who's a freelance artist, researcher and producer. So welcome, thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
I think to get us started, if you could all just give a bit of a short introduction to yourself and include a visual description in that. Yeah.
Should I go first? So I am Nikki Riggon. I'm 5'5", female, mixed heritage, white to black Caribbean, long brown hair, and today I'm wearing all black, as I usually am. And I'm head of program for Punch Records and also a creative producer. And I work mainly in the music industry, but across arts. And we focus on diversifying the industry and making it a fairer place for artists and everyone that works in it.
Thanks, Nikki. Hazel.
Yeah, so I'm Hazel. As Lucy said, I'm a freelance artist, researcher and producer based in Birmingham. I work in disabled and queer communities, and recently a lot of my research has focused on disabled people in leadership and workplace cultures to help support that.
Great.
And my visual description. So I'm a tall, white, non-binary person. I have brown, curly hair that is done up in a messy bun. I am wearing a pink t-shirt with flowers on it and a black cardigan.
Perfect, thank you. And Tina.
Hi, thank you for the invite. My name is Tina Hofman. I am an artist, producer and a researcher, mainly dealing with performing arts practice, but kind of I really want to say like I'm anti-practice. I want to feel like I can cross practices, and I very often do. I am really loving supporting other people's work, so this is where kind of my producing comes in, and peer supporting fellow artists or early career artists, or working with communities and supporting them. And I am finalizing my PhD research, which zooms in on representation.
You'll get there,
A representation of East European artists in British kind of performing arts scene, but I am looking very critically at representational politics and how diversity work is done, and that's constantly feeding into my arts practice and back and so on. I am a white, short woman with mix of grey and blonde hair, which is sort of short bob with fringe, and I've got very big white spectacles, red lipstick today, and I'm wearing very colourful green and other colours trousers and a green top with a golden heart cut out in the middle.
Perfect, thank you. So I think to kick off the conversation, and obviously we're thinking about recruitment practices from different points of view, different perspectives, from inside organisations doing the work of recruiting people, of writing those policies, and also as people who are on the other side of that often, and perhaps from a freelance perspective as well. The first question is thinking around recruitment practices themselves, and I think there's a lot of kind of will behind that to make them more accessible, more equitable. The question is, how would it look different if we could co-design recruitment practices with traditionally excluded groups?
Do you want to?
I can't remember what I said. So we practiced this conversation earlier, and I'm sure I said many wonderful things that I'll forget to say now. I think things would obviously look better if things were co-designed by people from traditionally marginalised groups. I think some of that already happens. So in my area of kind of disability, there are organisations who've done a lot of really great co-design work, and kind of their practices now include kind of easy read information and application packs, interview guides, accepting applications in a variety of formats. But some of the issue is just kind of there's not been that much take-up. A lot of those organisations have made their work public and kind of have really tried to make their work kind of sector influencing, and there's just not been that much kind of take up from across the whole sector. So I think that's one thing for me there, of kind of there's the question of what would look different if things were co-designed, but there's also the question of some stuff already has been co-designed and it's just not getting taken up everywhere, which is one of the issues.
And so then what I said. So I talked about it is a great idea. It's an amazing idea. However, for that to even happen, people have to, organisations, people in organisations have to recognise that it's something that needs to be addressed. And I think a lot of the time it's just avoided rather than addressed. And nothing can change until someone decides that there's a problem there and something needs to change and start moving forward with it.
I'm so sorry, Lucy. I'm also finding, Hazel, what you said around getting the message out there, immediately kind of comparing to extending access in theatre practice. If people feel excluded even before looking at the opportunity, I think that is what we're not addressing. I think the fact that we're, especially within the sector, shouting, oh, but we've looked at it, we've co-designed it, it is accessible. But what in the way we are changing the imaginary of people who have traditionally felt excluded and will continue to do that? How is that change happening so that people might consider, oh, there's a recruitment ad or there's an event, show, experience. It could actually be, I could actually be included rather than going, I also feel in terms of co-design, I hope I haven't interrupted you. I also feel in terms of co-design, something that our dear colleague Faith, although we shouldn't be mentioning names, but has said, you don't know what you don't know. So organizations or freelancers, small organizations, large organizations, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I found something really interesting in that kind of supporting workforce with lived experience and being able to have generative conversations around that co-design. But very often when we imagine what traditionally excluded looks like, because I'm sure we kind of all do that, imagine what's the concept of that, we go into the format of classification. And particularly if there are environments where there is not a lot of lived experience workforce around,
Mm-hmm.
that imaginary of classification still remains. So kind of, okay, we think we know who are traditionally excluded, but again, the aspects of how people might find barriers manifest for them is a very different...
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of another way of maybe framing or thinking about the question is how would recruitment practices look different in organisations that were already led by people from traditionally excluded groups. And yeah, I think, Nikki, you were speaking maybe to how at Punch there are certain things you just don't think about because
we kind of naturally are a really diverse team. But I think that is the result of us really being kind of ingrained in the work that we do with community and really listening to people and talking to people and building that way. So, for example, we have quite a few people on our team who we worked with through our programs. So they'd come on board as artists or as maybe through volunteer positions, and we've gotten to know them and learn about them, and they become part of the team that way. So yeah, it does feel like a really natural process for us.
Yeah,
I think that speaks to kind of Tina's first point around kind of the what has to happen almost before you get to the recruitment process to make people feel like this is a workplace that you can be part of. It is that kind of long-term relationship building work that has to happen a lot of the time if you're actually trying to reach those traditionally excluded communities.
And that's the difference, isn't it? If you're actually trying, if you're genuinely trying and you're being authentic about it and it's real and it's not just like a tick box, it's not just something that you're doing because you feel like you have to, like that's our work, that is what we do. It just works.
Yeah, I think in my experience it goes outside of the maybe formal recruitment practices themselves. So as someone with a long-term health condition, I'm also looking at if they've got a visible access policy or if all of those other kind of markers that might tell you whether an organisation feels like a place for you. That's not just about that. It is about recruitment, but it's also about your experience past that in the organisation.
There's something around inquisitiveness, isn't it? That
Sorry, I was pretending to do a telescope.
Hazel's acting out there.
I would say, like, almost not kind of like that, but like, turn it on and like inquisitive about internal policies. And again, I'm just being led by that. You don't know what you don't know. So how do you find the scope of what to know? And as much as I think it is important for whomever is recruiting, whether that's a fellow freelancer or an organization, is to find within the recruitment practice, if that's the first step we're talking about, that kind of softness in, okay, let's see, where people are already. I'm obviously already talking at the point of interview, or at the point of kind of, so that's already a very far kind of stage to which only very few come, because again, we're talking about reaching those people who might traditionally not even look at those opportunities in the first place.
Hazel?
Sorry, I kind of want to ask permission to get marginally political, and just realising it's something that is maybe useful to say in spaces like this as well. Just go to something you were saying earlier, Tina, about kind of the imagining the workforce and who is kind of the ready workforce, and a little bit of kind of what arts organisations can do to be kind of supporting and making the workforce itself resilient to changes that are coming from outside of it.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about at the moment with this is kind of access to work, for example, which is a very significant pillar of what enables disabled people to take part in work is kind of currently at the moment under kind of operational pressures and cuts to be kind of drastically reducing the amount of support that disabled people are eligible to receive. Personal independence payments as well are under very similar kinds of pressure. These are just the ones I know about. I'm fairly certain for kind of other communities there are other structural things that support entry to the workforce that are kind of beyond the ability of any individual arts organisation to kind of tackle. But when we're talking about inquisitiveness and other things like that, that's something else that people are kind of looking out for, is kind of like, oh, how are you using your position in the sector to be supporting or opposing those type of movements that are happening outside? That's something I'm definitely looking at, is kind of our organisations speaking up about the access to work cuts and things like that. And a lot are, which is fantastic. But it'd be great to have kind of even more arts organisations taking that seriously and realising that is part of it. Those kinds of seismic changes are going to drastically reduce just the amount of disabled people that are in our workforce at all.
And it's already visible.
With recruitment.
It's already very much in the public eye and very visible.
And it feels like there's so many things like that at the moment. I think when we're also seeing, absolute kind of shutdown of conversation around EDI in the US, for example, at the same time with the Supreme Court ruling on trans people and safe spaces, and thinking about, as an organisation, are you signalling your politics, and how can you do that in a way that's not performative but is genuine, because I think people are looking to see, does this feel like a place that is that will welcome me.
I think there's also always the dynamic that needs to be taken into account, that the person, again, I'm talking about a very kind of high level of recruitment, when the person has already been shortlisted and potentially is at the interview. But that kind of, despite everything that everyone will say, I'm talking as a freelancer, of course the organisation or the job, the project needs to fit the person as much as the project. So there's kind of two-way recruitment process always going on. But when you're in a position of needing money, you kind of, a lot of freelancers are basically going in with kind of going, I can do whatever.
Yeah, I'll do it.
I can do whatever, because, obviously I need the job. So there's a huge element of power dynamics in the recruitment process, where with only very, very carefully crafted dialogue, I will say, not line of questioning, might one figure out what the insecurities or what the desires for good working environment might be, because the position who is being recruited is almost always in an inferior position, because here we're not talking executive headhuntings. And most certainly within the scope of work I am familiar with, being a freelancer, whether auditioning, whether being interviewed for a project, or whether trying to get into an organisation, the power play is always really visible. So, I think a lot of things, even if invited because of organisation policies, like, it won't be shared, because there's too much at risk. I think at large, I will say,
Definitely.
Even now,
we're getting into the transparency conversation now, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Which I think is
even now, I'm having like hesitancy kind of to go, because you're kind of going, how much
can I say, or how much should I say? And that really speaks to the next question, which is around transparency and how organisations can be more transparent. Do we want them to be? Specifically, should they name their blind spots when it comes to recruiting? So do we want to know, we're struggling we're not representative of this group currently in our organisation, and should they be talking about those things? How does that land?
I think yes, if they can do that, if they're willing to take ownership of those things, if they're willing to admit then 100%. I don't think anything bad could come of being honest and saying, we need to fix this. And this is how, this is what we need. And like, who can help? Who's willing to, move forward with us? Absolutely. What do you guys think?
I can go.
I'm looking for inspiration.
I'll do my best. I think I completely agree with Nikki. The kind of transparency around those blind spots is really important. Something else that I quite advocate for as well is kind of transparency around what happens when the work gets tough. And this, for me, comes in more kind of induction than recruitment. But I think there are actually some organisations that do a very good job of doing some of the recruitment practices that we'll be talking about here today, and they look on the face of it like they're going to be a very supportive, welcoming place to work. But kind of the reality of working there is quite different. And I think being able to be transparent about, okay, so these are our policies, these are our procedures, this is what it's like to work here when things are going well. We do this level of consultation, we work at these levels, we have these kind of breaks, these kind of working hours. But being able to be honest about the fact that, 30% of the time in some organisations, 70% of the time in other organisations, we're in crisis mode. And when we're in crisis mode, it looks more like this. It's maybe more hierarchical. It's more kind of, the captain has the final call. And I think for some people, that's not necessarily a problem. It's just information that they need. And I'm saying that particularly as somebody working kind of disability and neurodiversity. Like for autistic folks, that is a deep incongruence of kind of people saying that their working culture is one way when in reality it looks very different. And I think just being able to be honest about kind of, this is what we aspire to be, this is the what we are in our good days, but we don't always get there, and being honest about kind of when we're not in our good day, this is what it's like to work here. I think would improve retention and improve a lot of those relationships that people have with the places that they work. Or maybe nobody would work there, but I don't think that's true. But I know that's what people would be fearful of, so it's worth naming.
I think it would be attractive for someone, for an organisation to say, like, these are our sore points, and we are introspective. We can look at what we don't do well, and we want to address it, and this is how. For me, I would think, oh, okay, cool. They're willing to grow. How can I grow with them? What does that look like? And it would attract me more than anything than putting me off. So.
Also being honest about kind of stuff where they're kind of like, this is where we're falling down. We're not doing that much on it yet. So we're focusing on other stuff. Like this is like, we care about this, but it's not a priority for us right now, which was really hard to admit to. But it needs to be. So often, the reality when we get into those organisations is people going, we really care about that, but no dice right now. The finances aren't there. All the time.
Or resources. Which I think comes down to. I also, just from listening to those prompts, I'm wondering how do practices, whether organizational practices, institutional practices, or freelance practices, get to that introspective stage? Because that's also the time that needs to happen, that kind of working with, against someone who might be offering an objective assistance, there is no objectivity, but an outside friendly critical eye to air out what are the gaps within whether practice or organizational practice that one is looking at, okay, this is what we're doing really well, this is what we're not addressing yet, and this is what we really should be addressing, this is what we really should be but we can't, and so on. So it just makes me think about leadership and about leadership practices and about that kind of taking time out, cultivating that time out to reflect on what you are doing, what are the formats of working, how can you self-reflect and be critical without kind of being detrimental, whether to an organization or worse, if you're working as a freelance or freelance-led organization, to kind of find out those spots and strategies that one could take to make a change and to feel strong or stable, that when you're welcoming a person whose needs you'd really like to meet, you'd really like to find that dialogue at saying, I'm not sure how to go about this, but let's have a conversation. How could this look like? But to be in a position where you are able to then take a lead on that and to do something about that, which kind of makes me, big circle to say, cultivating leadership amongst traditionally marginalized is incredibly important, because
Hugely,
only hiring traditionally marginalized, so that when people come, again, I'm going back to the power dynamic, come from sort of bottom entrance, and most certainly won't be voicing issues because they want to stay in the job.
Yeah.
And why am I saying that? Well, because of obviously kind of personal experience, where you kind of go, be easy to work with, don't be problematic. So really, really important to have that sounding board at a leadership level, to invest that time at training, investing in leadership from traditionally marginalized, so then that change can happen.
100%.
And it's a really good point that it's long-term, deep work, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in order for this not to be tokenistic, it's about systems change, not just about how you how you frame one particular document. Hazel?
Did you have?
No.
Okay. It was just kind of like a name drop moment, I think, based on some of the stuff you were talking about, Tina, which feels very relevant with this, when you were talking about being honest about kind of changes that you're making, changes that you're going to make, changes you haven't had a chance to make yet, and kind of those introspective tools and spaces. More Than a Moment has done like a lot of work in those things, and kind of the More Than a Moment action plans. And I think Chris Sudworth at Hippodrome helped kind of design a template for, which has a lot of those kind of mechanisms in them of kind of being like, just talk about what you are able to do right now, what's not on the agenda yet. I think is a really helpful tool, and kind of the spaces that Culture Central runs and that More Than a Moment runs that can be those kind of those more introspective spaces, and potentially those more vulnerable spaces to talk about what you are and aren't able to do.
Absolutely.
And also, I
Got
think
your plugs in.
also, I think extending on that inquisitiveness and self-reflection, I think I get a little bit kind of deeper into my seat when we're talking about traditionally excluded or traditionally marginalized, because again, with my kind of the way I think and the way I conceptualize things, again, it's that imaginary, and I immediately kind of there's like almost a visual of that. And again, it is what we don't know, but I'm again going back to sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and we have compartmentalized. And I think within the sector we still work very, very strongly and feel most comfortable if we have compartmentalized. And I have a feeling that in order for structural change to start happening is to start seeing beyond those compartments and beyond. I'm just kind of mentioning a work experience when people hear about the barriers, when ears are open, let's say, and organizations hear about the barriers, and then they go like, oh, I wasn't aware that, because you don't really fall within and you kind of go, oh, I wasn't aware you were compartmentalizing, and that there is no box to tick for this, and that we need to be fighting for because I have a feeling that those boxes have actually, as much as there's huge amount of good in making visible what has been traditionally invisible or unheard of before, at the same time, okay, we really need to start thinking, how do we now move past the box compartmentalization, because then something that doesn't fit any of the boxes but still has barriers manifesting for them, it's like, what do we then do? Do we, like, how do we stop more people feeling unheard?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I guess through the Charter for Equity research, it's something that quite a few people have brought up around what happens when you sit slightly outside that. What happens when you do face difficulties, and you have, but you're not one of those 9 protected characteristics, because we don't all fit into a box, right? And also it's not as simple as each of those being separated, right? Like, we know that there's, through an intersectional viewpoint, that someone could be sitting across many of those different characteristics, and that's going to add another layer of difficulty. And how do we think about this in maybe a bit more of a nuanced way?
There's like a really interesting concept I've heard when I started doing my research, falling through the cracks of whatever system of diversity or marginalization, and it's like falling through the cracks. You're kind of going, how come we've set up the system where you can fall through the cracks of? It's like it's obviously something that's not serving the system in the way that it should be. But I think also I want to hark back to a provocation I found really interesting when we said we were going to have a conversation about this, which is a quote, Dave O'Brien's quote from a paper. I'm not sure whether I'm going to misquote it now, which is hiring is a form of cultural matching. I think I apologize to Dave O'Brien if I have misquoted. But for me, that's it was a really, really interesting way of self-reflecting, especially within the sector, because it can kind of imply both. It can imply being really kind of careful to kind of put a lot of different ingredients in that when we want to say cultural matching, but also it might imply very much the idea of one has got to, or organization has got to be really aware of the going with the flow, that kind of ease of cultural matching that might seem almost like unconscious bias. Like, how much are we aware of unconscious bias in any facet of our interaction, professional interaction? Like, how much are we within groups of people encouraging ourselves to kind of go out of your comfort zone, make sure you connect with someone who is so out of maybe I don't know, an unconscious spectrum of situation where I would be drawn to.
So, like, how much are you willing to be comfortable with shaking up culture? And what is your attitude towards that? Is it that shaking up culture is bad always?
Yes.
Can it be good? How is it good? Why is it good?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in the industry, you know, obviously I'm speaking as a practicing artist here. I'm not going to scare anyone, so I'm not going to be really disruptive, but arts needs to be disruptive.
Yeah.
We have to be disruptive.
Yeah.
We are so not disruptive.
Yeah.
We are so, and that disruption can come with a really positive earthquake shaking. It can be, it's not about people are adverse to risk. Like, okay, I understand. I'm not now talking money. But sometimes it is about that risk-taking that might make you slip or might make you fly in kind of, especially in terms of recruitment practices, going like, wow, that worked. Or like, that really didn't work. Yeah. Which kind of also takes me to the fear of being cancelled. Because I think a lot of that within arts and culture is about fear of making that disruptive step. Because it's like, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying, but I have a feeling that a lot of people, especially with really good intentions, are sometimes not as risky as they should be, because there's the fear. I don't know what my
fear of getting it right or getting it wrong, I suppose.
Fear of getting it wrong more than getting it right.
Yeah.
and then hiding behind a lot of things that we feel worked really well in that kind of look how well we are doing, but you're kind of going, but be dangerous, be more
go
bold.
further.
Yeah.
Go harder.
I think going on to the next question, I'm really thinking about, which is some of what we've been talking about, but the reality of the sector right now, of jobs, of recruitment, and it feeling quite challenging, I think, a lot of the time. Do we, as people applying for jobs, need to be prepared to be shapeshifters, to work in lots of different ways in different roles? And following that, how could the sector have more of a willingness to embrace that, or to value kind of transferable skills, different pathways to getting into this work? And I suppose, how does the recruitment practice kind of mirror the reality of working in the sector?
Yeah, I nearly lie periodically. I don't know that I really lie, but I have a highly curated where I kind of, at the very least, the first sentence I'll be like, yeah, I'm a communications expert. That's the work I've been doing for years. Or yeah, I'm a fundraising expert or whatever. And it's a very minute fraction of the skills that I've developed over the years. And yeah, I think it's I think the sector has to get better at admitting that's what it's doing, because I don't actually know anyone who's not doing that, who's not very carefully reconstructing their kind of. And actually, I'll be honest, I've worked at an organisation where they said, like, on your future CVs, don't worry about what you say your job title was when you were working here. Yeah. Pick the job title that helps you get the next job. So it's, you know, I feel like it's a fairly open secret that is how people are applying for jobs and how and how it's going down. So yeah, I think that flexibility, it just has to be there. Stating the obvious. Yeah.
Kind of flexible in its nature, because I suppose if you're an artist, you learn what it looks like backstage. You learn what it looks like to work with a team. So by nature, you pick up transferable skills from being able to help and work with your team. So it makes sense that if you're recruiting, you look at what you can place in different places. I think I'm really lucky. Oh, here's me saying this on camera. I think the leadership within the organisation that I work with have really shown like good ways of working in terms of like growing their team and transferring skills across that team, and plucking or recruiting people from various different backgrounds who they've been able to push in directions that they see strength in, but then change quickly when the opportunity arises. And it is about that leadership and being willing to take those risks. I think it's hugely important that artists are able to, not just artists, anyone working in the creative industry obviously, are able to recognise how transferable those skills are as well. And not just transferable in the creative sector, but across sectors. And they're important to other sectors. So yeah, hugely important.
Can I ask tangibly what some of that's looked like? So you're talking about kind of the leadership being responsive to people realising they have maybe a passion or a skill in different areas. Has that been kind of people applying for jobs that weren't foreseen? Has it been kind of just kind of in an informal way of being like, you know, actually I want to handle this area of that responsibility? What does that look like when it's happening, when it's going well? A
bit of everything. I think it's learning who you're working with and being able to be introspective and figure out where you're maybe not getting things right, but where the people in your team, if they unpacked certain skills, maybe could help in certain areas, and like just really getting to know who you're working with. So I started out where I am now as in a communications role, just part-time, and the more the organisation learnt about me, the more I took more of a turn into production. The more I unpacked production, actually I started to unpack how many times can I say unpack? I unpacked everything. I started to look at leadership and leading teams, and now I look at our portfolio of work over the year and how teams work across them. So yeah, my skills have been unpacked over and over again to see how I can like work better with the organisation and how they can get the most out of what I can do. Yeah.
I've got a slightly different experience, particularly with confidence to kind of self-curate skills, like defending. Maybe I almost I admire and desire more of that because, and again, that's me now saying this on camera, I find it really difficult, like certain job descriptions, certain kind of duties, I tend to read and I tend to kind of go, oh, I'm not sure whether I can deliver that.
Yeah.
And whilst there are a few opportunities, there have been a few opportunities where I read it and I go, that's made for me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go into the interview or into writing that application if it's like an artist, like residential or development work, or project invitation application, to kind of go in with that confidence, this is made for me. But it really is based on my quite rigorous assessment of what I can bring to that, and the awareness of where I might not be able to quite bring into something. And I have a feeling that exact training in that, just make yourself an expert in communication. Come on.
Why not?
Yeah, that's your, again, maybe because of having worked as a freelancer within freelancer-led organization for such a long time, that is there the organizational dynamic of, going from role to role and kind of going, I've got social media in my little finger. It's like, but kind of talking with that confidence about something that might not be my strongest point, but I'll make it. I think it probably depends again to how much, again, I'm only presuming from my point of view, how maybe little have people navigated the recruitment sector. And also, I think that innate confidence, because when you are structurally, how would I say, developed in a way to say, stick to your thing, that's what you're doing really well, that kind of surfing is not for you, because what if they find out you're fake? What if they find out you're fake? That's like, what will happen then? And again, I'm very much tapping now into a lot of sort of invisible cultural barriers, particularly for people who don't have the social capital, maybe of being trained, educated in this country, knowing how that kind of surfing feels like. You kind of that's where things get much more narrow. But again, it's not an excuse to say don't do it, but it's just that awareness that that might be.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. Like the fact of this being an open secret and not just standard practice is that the people who have that social capital or have that understanding of kind of like, I can surf in this way and I'm not going to get penalized for it, are the people who end up getting those job roles, and other people get shut out from them. That is a big part of the consequence of pretending that we value credentials and work experience history above skills and above culture matching, which is what we're often doing most of the time.
I feel like I should say, so when I was working in the communications role when I first started out, and I was offered the role of production, I said no. I was like, I can't do that. I am not doing that. And I think it speaks to everything we said about leadership and like leadership being bold and being okay with taking risks and being happy to do that, because I said no and they were like, no, you can do it. You can do it. So I just wouldn't have done it if it were my choice.
That's amazing though, to have a culture that,
and that really needs, and it again just taps into that fearlessness taking risks and sort of just going, I've got a good hunch about this person. Like maybe on the CV they either don't have or don't know how to demonstrate or extract that. So it looks like, you know, like one of my big bugbears is like fit your CV to look like job, you know, and especially like now being in touch with like the universities, like career department, I'm undergoing like a whole re-education of how do you get work or at least get like an interview based on CV, and I still like I've got huge problems with it at the moment because it doesn't come natural. But some people have wonderful portfolio CVs and with that enormous talent, and they should have that CV. But some people have enormous talent and won't have that CV, or maybe won't know how to construct it, won't even know how to recognize their own transferable skills. You know, what you were saying, that skill was recognized in you. And for example, I know when I work collaborating with community, or when I work with young people, you know, when you recognize that talent and the young person, for example, doesn't believe in themselves, and you go and do it. What could possibly go wrong? Just go. Like, the worst thing that can happen is you don't like it.
But what's the best thing?
Exactly. And it's like the change that makes in that person, and the fact and the change that it maybe makes in you for having realized that there is a potential. So maybe the question is also within those recruitment practices, how can we peel our eyes off CV only? How do we sense the potential?
And look further than those credentials to more,
Because it's magical, isn't it? Potential is magical, what it does to people's lives, but also then to the contribution, outside of the box contribution to that project, organization, fellow collaboration is enormous.
And I guess, it'd be interesting if you could share maybe some of the good experiences that you've had, or things that have gone well for you, and that might be on either side of the recruitment process. When does it work? What does it look like when it works?
Ooh, that's the longest
Has it ever
pause
worked?
we've had.
Has it ever worked?
No, it has. Of course it has.
And it could also be like thinking about what your ideal version of that might be. It might not be something you've experienced, but it might be, this is what would be the best way for it to go.
I feel like I've probably touched on it a few times while we've been speaking, but the fact that we go in to our like previous programs to look for people that we already know and that we've already built with in some way has been a really effective way to make sure that we recruit people who are really interested in what we do and have as much passion as we do about the people that we're working with, and the way that we're like upskilling young people, or working with new artists, or looking into new trends. And I think it's something that's probably not done enough. That organisations go out into the community and really get to know people beforehand.
Have you got any thoughts on that, Hazel?
I am losing my ability to think slowly. But no, I think some of the things that I know I've seen and that I've received that have really worked have been. I've had some really interesting contracts from people that are just very simple and that really clearly explain things in a way that I can understand and I get what I'm being asked to do. I think that's a really valuable kind of part of mostly responding to briefs, which is the most common kind of recruitment activity that I engage with from that side. I think I'm just now realising how few jobs I've actually got from recruitment.
Yeah, which is also
just
interesting,
from open
right?
recruitment rather than...
Or how
Like
many have gone really
informal.
well.
Yeah.
Rather than
Not
word
bad.
of mouth.
Yeah, because I've kind of, like a lot of particularly the early jobs that I had were kind of through through being part of programs and kind of existing relationships were how that happened. That was very good recruitment practice. So there was a time where I was essentially living as almost a full-time carer for somebody, and I began volunteering with somewhere, and they wanted to start paying me. And I said, okay, I understand that. I'm not going to be able to work anything resembling consistent hours. I'm going to need to be able to cancel fairly last minute if something goes wrong. And they were just endlessly flexible with me during that time, and really allowed me to slowly ramp up my involvement in that organisation from somebody who was voluntarily doing half a day a month to somebody who by the end of it I was kind of like 3 or 4 days a week. So that real willingness from leadership again to believe in the potential that I had and to let a role essentially grow organically around a valuable relationship that we seem to have, where it was kind of okay, you have something to offer this organization, this is a sector that you care about, we're going to let this take as long as it needs to take to find the right shape. So I have a very positive story, don't I?
You do. So we work a lot with freelancers. So we I hope have lots of good experiences that I can talk about, but we will be flexible. We want to hold on to these relationships. We know that like the sector that we work in, particularly we're regional. The arts scene is small, so while we're building, we want to hold on to those relationships. So we will work with people as we recruit, and it is things like maybe I've had to colour code a contract when sending that over, and that's absolutely fine, we'll do that. But it's about being approachable and appearing like an organisation that is like open to be flexible, and you can talk to about anything that you need. I think that's really important, and I hope we do that. I think we do that.
Is there something interesting there about those experiences which are really positive being quite informal ones? Whereas maybe across the sector we might be trying to move away from informal, for example, like nepotistic practices or the ways that people get into these industries, and therefore making them more formal. But maybe some of that really positive recruitment or how you get into an organisation is about knowing them, like taking part in their activities. And how do we balance that line, I guess, is quite a difficult one.
It is, but it is, I think that is the gist of it, is being relaxed around practices which then imply that, like you've mentioned, Hazel, you kind of go back to people invite you to work for them, and I personally hugely value that, and I know that a lot of kind of my immediate circle of colleagues and creatives do a lot of work through that, being invited to work again. And there's, as much as we all need to kind of make sure that we widen our circles, there is something, especially in environment where funds are scarce, of knowing who will do the job in such a way, and also having had that conversation around maybe accessibility already, that then works. And I really praise that. And maybe there is something to kind of take from that, from how did we get to those informal points that perhaps organizations who really want to widen their accessibility towards traditionally excluded or marginalized workforce, that can also almost be, I don't want to say blueprint because even that sounds too formal, but that can be something like a learning point to be taken on. And I have a feeling that there's a lot of it in how we ask questions. What is the invite? And I think very rarely do we think about what invite are we making to someone, to inviting someone to join us. Because it's fundamentally that, we're inviting someone else to join us. And how do we throw that invite? How do we throw that invite in a way that it could best depict that, okay, and we've now in the interview we've created, or in application we're creating this idea where we want you to tell us about your passions, about what drives you, about what really excited you about this call, because if we can then see that excitement,
make it a bit more human.
And almost, I don't want to say everything else becomes secondary. Of course it doesn't. There needs to still be hope that the person will be able to execute whatever the job entails. But there's huge potential in learning. Huge potential in learning in someone who comes in and goes, oh, I guess I could do it. And it's like within such a short time, because they're so passionate about it, they will learn. They will learn on the spot. And I think also there's a huge potential in invite to play. That it's like that work and play is very much seen as a separate, isn't it? Whilst as beings we learn through play. And if I'm not proposing that workplaces need to be this irreverent places that are, playful. No, not that at all. But there's an element again from that we could take into our practices, into our recruitment practices, into our work practices, that then doesn't let people know that they're not good enough or they're not enough, but kind of go, I can see your potential.
Yeah.
Give it a couple of days, we'll be doing it.
Do you want to add something?
I did. It was just kind of, I think on the playfulness stuff as well, but also just on kind of open recruitment is very important, and it kind of does also work. And I think in terms of blending the two and finding that balance, one of my other, I think, really positive recruitment experiences was for a job where there was an open recruitment process, and I didn't get the job. But on the back of that interview, it was kind of being told, like, but we have maybe this.
Yeah.
This could work, or maybe can we have a conversation about a different way to work together? So kind of, I think, not viewing it as kind of you can either have this relationship-based way of recruiting, or open recruitment where everything is kind of tight and rigid, and being willing to invite playfulness into those open recruitment practices that are really important, for accessibility and for people discovering who you are and the kind of work that you do, but being open to being like, okay, we're not maybe just here to recruit for one post. What we're here is we're about to initiate 10 new relationships, and where can all of those relationships with people we're interviewing potentially go, and approaching it with that kind of play and that kind of blending the two.
I very much want to second also the open recruitment processes, because and particularly where there is maybe a larger organisation at play that should continuously be keeping their hand on the pulse of the ever-changing workforce, whether early career workforce or very much, as I was saying, it's not only about kind of hiring from bottom up, very much workforce that might have moved into the area that is anything but early career, but just keeping their pulse on how conversations are changing, and just maybe sometimes having those conversations rather than recruiting for a role, because maybe the nerves will be less, and therefore the conversation and sort of self-presentation and ideas, conception around where could one fit within that organisation could be communicated differently. But how important it is to keep, again, that self-awareness of who is currently my circle. How can I consciously, or how can we consciously go outside of that? Which messages are we getting from collaborators who are talking about maybe different recruitment practices, or where they can better communicate their skills, or curiosity about kind of learning new skills? Where can we spot the potential of, this person could stay in this organisation for quite a long time?
And I think we're going to have to wrap up our conversation there. Does anyone have a one-sentence takeaway that they want to share, or any kind of last point they want to make, just briefly?
There's like loads of things that I want to say.
Yeah.
I think flexibility is really, really important, and I think and I know that organisations like Culture Central are working on building leadership which is flexible and which is representative of arts and artists in the region, and I can't wait to see what comes with it.
Yeah. Thanks, Nikki.
I think it's more a final point than a takeaway, which is kind of around recognising that it's difficult and recognising the role that resources kind of play.
Yeah.
Recognising we all kind of represent kind of Birmingham-based kind of organisations, and that we're in a relatively well-funded position as a city compared to the wider region.
Yeah.
And also just the importance of just as important as trying this stuff is kind of how you respond when you're challenged about it, because that's going to happen, because we're going to get this wrong. It's a learning journey, and just kind of being open to feedback, being open to working with communities, being honest, being transparent about what resources you have available to you, and not reacting defensively, or just not kind of acting like somebody is an enemy because they've kind of maybe pointed out kind of, you seem to have this area of underrepresentation, or this aspect of your recruitment practice maybe needs work. Yes, resources are a factor in why that happens, but there's usually something that you can still do to be improving your practices, and if you're open to having conversations with people, then you can do that collaboratively.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think that's something I'd take away from the conversation right now, but also from kind of reflecting on both freelance practice, so being in a position of being recruited, or being a freelance-led organisation who is recruiting. Some feedback is really difficult to hear, especially when like the whole context and background of working environment is like on a shoestring or already stretched to the all of that is fine, but it's like keeping, I mean, I always keep on sort of saying, you know, what is a robust conversation? What is kind of a robust conversation that makes learning happen? Things that are not always good to hear, and it'd be great to have praise, but like, how can that robust conversation initiate learning for that light bubble to kind of go, oh, I didn't think about that. Because very often that's always a point of learning. Oh, I didn't think about that. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think that's all we've got time for, sadly. I feel like we could all talk about this forever. But yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to all of you for taking part. To Nikki, Hazel and Tina. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Lucy.
And thanks for listening also. So Radical Listening Week is just the start of these conversations, and you can find the other podcasts on Culture Central's YouTube channel and social media, so please do join the conversation and add your voice. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.